Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session of the Population Health Colloquium. I'm Dr. Tracy Nichols, professor and chair of the Department of Community and Global Health and director of the PhD program in Population Health here at Lehigh University. The Colloquium series is a signature event of the College of Health. It began in 2021 during the inaugural academic year of the college. And each year we explore a key topic through the lens of population health. We examine how policies, systems, and environments shape health outcomes. In previous years, we've explored COVID-19 and its broad-reaching impacts, women in health and healthcare, disability independence, and health policy and politics. Our speakers have included industry professionals, academics, researchers, and community partners, and each bring their expertise to enrich our understanding of the topic. This year, we have focused on the Vital Conditions for Health and Well-Being framework. This is a framework that defines the 7 essential conditions that people and communities need to reach their full potential. And so throughout the series, we've heard from activists and scholars across disciplines who work alongside communities to promote health and well-being. The discussions have illuminated how this work is conducted and how the framework can be applied in both research and practice. For our final presentation in the series, we are honored to welcome an esteemed panel of experts who will discuss navigating community-based participatory research, or CBPR, with refugee-origin communities. On the panel, we have Sharon Morrison, a professor at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, Tej Mishra, who is the executive director of the Bhutanese community in Harrisburg, and Rochelle Fraunfelker, who is an assistant professor with us here in the Lehigh College of Health. So our session today is going to focus on the importance of involving communities as partners in mental health research to address key issues and reduce health disparities. And our presenters are going to explore the opportunities and challenges of building and maintaining equitable research partnerships with refugee origin groups resettled in the U.S., and being able to offer perspectives from both researchers and refugee community leaders. As a format, we're going to have each of the panelists present an overview of their work, and afterwards I have several questions that I'm going to ask them that will hopefully start a dialogue on the topic. We're then going to take questions from the audience through the Q&A feature. So please feel free to submit your questions as they arise. We're going to do our best to address as many as possible once we get to the QA portion of the session. Please join me in welcoming our presenters, Dr. Morrison, Mr. Mishra, and Dr. Fraunfelker, as they share their insights and experiences on this important topic. I'm going to provide a brief introduction for each of our panelists before they present. And so I'm going to start us off with Dr. Sharon Morrison. Sharon Morrison is a professor in the Department of Public Health Education and the inaugural fellow for community engaged research in the School of Health and Human Sciences at UNC Greensboro. She uses CBPR approaches in her collaborative work with lower-income refugee origin communities to address pervasive issues, including intergenerational mental health challenges and youth elder well-being in tribal, multilingual refugee communities. She is also the co-founder of the Montagnard Asian Community Disparities Research Network, which is housed within an immigrant and refugee community-based organization. She's going to talk today on navigating the CBPR terrain through intergenerational discord and present a case-in-point lessons from her CBPR work within reoccurring intergenerational conflict in a refugee origin community. Their goals are to culturally unpack mental health stigma and document differing youth and elder perspectives on help seeking. And enough from me. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Morrison. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols, and I am going to share my screen, if that's okay with everyone, and do a quick run through of what I want to share today. Thank you, everyone. So hopefully you can see this. So I've titled this The Academic Community Collaboration with Refugee Origin Groups, and looking at opportunities and challenges with equitable partnerships. My colleagues that work with me, Dr. Sudha Srinivas in Human Development and Family Studies, and Mr. Andrew Young, who is a community advocate and represents several communities, have worked with me for a long time. And we share our passion for working with low-income refugee origin communities of Asian origin. We've coined the term LIACRO. So I'd like to go ahead and just walk you through some of what I perceive packages the work that I've been doing and I continue to learn as I work with communities. So I want to start with significant gaps. As someone that belongs to the academic community, I want to talk about the gaps that have occurred and how maybe we've navigated them successfully most of the time, unsuccessfully several times. First is our calendars. The academic calendar has a stop-start method to it or rhythm to it with weekends, holidays, spring breaks, etc. The community time is linear in the sense that the issues remain and continue to flow regardless of these stop-start gaps. So it's a difference in calendars. There's also a difference in power when we look at, so time factor, but let's look at resource factor. Oftentimes our academic institutions are resource rich. Communities we work with are resource poor or resource access poor. And so that creates a power dynamic that one has to negotiate. It creates a cultural gap in terms of value systems. So in the university, we value learning, we value productivity, we value accomplishments. The value systems of communities may differ. They value collectiveness, caring, et cetera, et cetera. They're not necessarily different, but there is a cultural gap. When we start working together, we have to recognize that we come at it with different value systems. The direction is also somewhat different. We think about the cultural gap in terms of what our agendas are. And so again, the academic institution, we're putting out folks that can enter the workforce. We're putting out scholarly products that impact our fields, impact the broader population health agenda. Community agenda, well-being, survival, adaptation, thriving. And so these agendas clash oftentimes. On the other hand, they can be negotiated because there's funds of knowledge coming from both sides, which I think can come together when we approach things with this idea of empathy, with this idea of reflection, the cultural competency that is needed to navigate both terrains. And in the work that I do with my community partners, we really utilize an anti-racist lens, looking towards this issue of social justice. And this all comes together. These gaps can be bridged by working with insiders. So we're connecting with insiders, both ends. So I wanted to then segue into what I think is very important. Refugee immigrant students are cultural insiders who plug gaps and sustain projects. And when you look at the myriad of issues being dealt with, it's important to understand from the academic perspective, since that's the community I primarily belong to, these are not just students, but cultural insiders with knowledge, wealth of navigational skills that are often not part of our repertoire on the academic side. So what are the tools that I work with in doing the work that I do working with low-income Asian communities of refugee origin, or LIACROs? There's a wealth of tools when we work with our cultural insiders as well as students in general. We bring to the table a toolkit that is diverse, functional, sustainable in many ways. And so in terms of one tool that I'm going to pull out is community-based participatory research, which actually has its foundation further down in this idea of community service and learning. And what I'm representing here is the engagement model that typically has worked with the communities that are in our region. And I failed to say that I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Greensboro is a very diverse community with its history of refugee resettlement and secondary migration, particularly from Central and South America. So we're very diverse. When we look on the community side in working with these mechanisms, we're looking at working with the community's youth who are on the academic side, but also important members of the community, knowledge keepers, mothers, young professionals in those communities, the leaders, the elders. On the academic side, we have a repertoire of individuals. And the work that I've done, I've worked across institutions, across sites with various project leaders and various majors. So this is sort of the engagement model that I've been using when I think about working to bridge these gaps. What we have superimposed here is this whole idea of what are we working towards? We're working towards making an impact, not only in the scholarship, but in the community. So we're looking at what we call transformational change. And therefore, we need this sort of toolkit to come together with the funds of knowledge, the know-how, the community speak to do the work that's needed for this change. And so you'll see superimposed some of the things that come out of it. What do the community, how does the community benefits? Organizing skills, the development of their youth, access not just to health, but also access to other services, civil rights, understanding what are your rights, your civic engagement, employment, mentorship. And of course, on the academic side, we're preparing next generation professionals. So the two groups that I use as case in points here are the Montagnard group. This is a population originally from the highlands of Vietnam and have been in our community for 35 plus years. Montagnards are unique. They exist in large numbers in North Carolina, and that's next to Southeast Asia. We have the largest outside of that country. So they are both global, national, local. And a fewer but not any less group is the Nepali-speaking Bhutanese community. They're newer in terms of refugee resettlement, and they've had about 10 to 12, maybe 15 years of being in our region. So here we have two refugee origin groups. And what's interesting about these groups, they're multilingual, they are farm-based, village-based. They've been dislocated and resettled in our region. And so this has been an interesting dynamic to look at a longer-term resettled community, shorter-term resettled community, but see the similarities, the struggles, as well as the triumphs of these communities. So I make reference to case in point. I've worked with the Montagnard community. It's probably learned my way through about 15 years. And in 2011, one of the elders, who is a former doctor from Vietnam, Montagnard, and Montagnard is a term used, a French term assigned to them. It means mountain people, but Montagnards will tell you we are identified by our tribal name, tribal language. So back in 2011, a group of us, my colleagues, we got a call saying we need some assistance. We're looking for expertise to work with us. We have several problems in our community, one of which is the rising prevalence of hypertension. But we have other issues too, including domestic violence, including maternal and child health issues, including this issue of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. And so we started a long-term relationship working with the various insiders. And we took this in phases because this was a learning process. And to my knowledge, this is the only CBPR project that has been done with this community at that point in time. But what I have is a representation. And while we address the issue of hypertension, we also included a broader phasing on looking at issues such as mental health in this community. And what is interesting to note, every step of the way included a collaboration between our academic community and members of this community. It started with dialogue with the youth, the college youth. It started with dialogue with the elders, and it started with dialogue with the grandmothers. And through these mechanisms, we worked to address, collect data that was important, that we put in the hands of the community, that we could organize around and begin to address issues that were of challenges. Now, while the focus is on mental health, this is not a topic that is well discussed in the community. And so we entered through this gate of looking at the idea that hypertension is related to stress. Stress is from pre-resettlement, post-resettlement, and integration and adjustment to new environments. Here, I want to just quickly mention that in our collaboration, we could not bypass some of the internal conflicts. If you're around enough, you build a trusting relationship, then you get some insider's knowledge. And so we recognize in dealing with intergenerational work, there was intergenerational conflict. Elders did not trust youth. And there were many reasons, but more importantly, they're watching their youth become more integrated and more proficient in navigating the broader community. And so we had to implement some strategies to be able to appreciate the internal dialogue and conflict as part of the process of doing this work. And so mediation spaces, we had places where youth and elders could have safe conversation and work through the differences or educate each other on the perspectives coming from back home to what we're dealing with now. And then diapraxis is where we got youth and elders together, brainstorming and coming up with solutions. We created safe space for this to happen. My final casing point in terms of thinking about working with communities and the collaboration is another program that we worked with, which was with the Bhutanese community. Again, fairly new, but experiencing some of the same. And again, we worked through this hypertension model because it was common to bring us to questions of what's happening, what are the stressors, what are the challenges in terms of mental health. And we launched into, again, working relationship, youth that are culturally competent and knowledgeable to be able to have a conversation and get things like data. But also to be culturally responsive in terms of interventions, in terms of understanding how to modify things and how to recognize with sensitivity ways in which people talk about their mental distress. And so I want to just end here by saying that what I have represented here are celebrations, because this is important despite the hard work and some of the things that we find. Mental health revolves around improvements, no matter how small. And so celebrations are important. And I think this visual is very telling because as you look, this is a diversity, the language, the cultural insiders that we've worked with to be able to advance, not just a a physical health issue, but also a mental health issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. That was really helpful and really starts us off strong. So next, we will hear from Tej Mishra, who is the Executive Director of Bhutanese Community in Harrisburg, also known as BCH, a community-based nonprofit organization serving Nepali-speaking former Bhutanese refugees. As the Executive Director, Tej has led important initiatives such as fostering and improving community relationship with law enforcement, research collaborations with universities to address public health issues of the community, and led the organization to become a refugee resettlement affiliate of one of the national refugee resettlement agencies. Tej has a master's in public health degree from BU and has worked as a surveillance epidemiologist for the state of Massachusetts Department of Health and then later for the District of Columbia's Department of Health. His experiences also expand to mental health research, notably in the CBPR framework. He's collaborated with CBPR projects as a research staff at Harvard University and later as a CBPR research consultant at Boston College, McGill University, and most recently as community partner through BCH here with Lehigh University. So please welcome Tej. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Good afternoon. Thank you all. Thank you, Rochelle, Tracy, and everyone involved for this opportunity to be part of this discussion. Thank you, and thank you, Tracy, for the introductions. I'd like to talk a few things about my involvement and my experience in this area of community-based participatory research. During my graduate studies years in Boston around 12 years ago, Dr. Franfelker, and when she was in her doctoral program at Harvard, we met through a project that Dr. Rochelle and other investigators at the time, Professor Teresa Betancourt, had recently started in our community. And that's how we got to know each other and have been had this amazing 10, 12 years long collaboration and partnership with Rochelle and others. I have a unique experience in that I had, even though my public health education was not specifically towards mental health research or community health, but this opportunity has, put me in a unique position because I represent the community that we're studying, and as well as having some public health education has given me some unique opportunities and experiences that I will share today. I have not any separate materials. Dr. Rochelle and I will be presenting on the same project that we have collaborated over the years, and I'll add my comments and other inputs through the same slides when later.
Great, thank you so much. And we're looking forward to hearing more about the project from both of you. But before we do that, the last panelist I'd like to present is Dr. Rochelle Franfelker, who is an assistant professor in the College of Health here at Lehigh University. She is a social epidemiologist with her doctorate in social and behavioral sciences from Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. A primary area of research is addressing mental health disparities among refugees and other war-affected populations. She conducts community-based participatory research with refugees that address mental health throughout the lifespan, ranging from preventing mental health problems among children and youth to promoting the psychosocial well-being of aging adults. A focus of her work is on adapting and implementing interventions that incorporate and privilege local understandings of mental health and wellness and leverage culturally relevant strategies for coping and healing. So please welcome Dr. Franfelker.
Hi, thanks, Tracy. And thank you, Sharon. That was such a great, I think, introduction overall for all of the sort of thinking about CBPR and some of these dynamics between academic community partnerships. Regardless of the specific group you're working with, or the health topic, right? So right now, in just sort of a background and building on what Tej said, I just want to share one slide, which is that working? Yes, thank you. And this, I just sort of, I think about the work that I've done with the Bhutanese community specifically, and I think it's important to talk about, when I think about doing work with any refugee origin community, to think about the importance of history, the importance of time, and the importance of place. And I think this is a story that we can tell from our 12, almost 13-year partnership at this point. So specifically thinking about ethnic Nepali Bhutanese and thinking about their life experience and sort of mental health research, which is what I do with this community, and how has this looked over time? And so, as a community, it was a community that was, there was expulsion from Bhutan in the mid-1980s to early 90s. They were residing in refugee camps in Nepal for minimum, 15, 20 years. Third country resettlement began in 2008, which included the US. And by 2016, there were over 90,000 who had come to the US. And then I'd say maybe around 2018, 2019-ish, there's been quite a bit of secondary migration of the community to different places in the US. And I think to sort of layer that on sort of what has mental health broadly research looked like, right? And there certainly was in the refugee camps a considerable amount of research with a focus on torture survivors, because there were many people were imprisoned in Bhutan and were tortured prior to fleeing. And so there was a lot of, there was work being done largely with that topic and the group of people, though other things as well. I think it's also notable, we look at after resettlement began, there was sort of very alarming statistics that were coming out, and the CDC wrote a report on high rates of suicide in the community. And that aligned with, at about that time, as Tej referenced, I was a doctoral student, he was a master's student. We both started working on a project in Boston with a researcher that was focused on children and adolescents and family functioning in this community. And that led through that work and talking to community members in Massachusetts, people expressing concerns also about the mental health of older adults in the community, which led to us applying for some seed funding, some pilot funding to start to investigate that. And that has gone on and is continuing now. We have a larger grant to focus through NIA on using CBPR and looking at older adults and caregivers. At the same time, there's certainly been other topics that have come up and to initiate some small research around, for instance, the issue of substance abuse among youth and young adults in the community. It's something that we started looking at last year, and also right now it's more evaluation, not research, but looking still at this topic of suicide in the community. And so I think a couple things then I would say I think are notable in terms of obviously it's history of the community that's relevant. And where they're at in that process of resettlement and migration over time. And along with that, what are the needs of a community that change over time? What are the issues that are most salient, for me, within the realm of mental health? And that can be, some things can persist, such as suicide, but then some things might change. The population of concern might change. Depending upon generational issues and challenges around resettlement, with the issue of substance abuse in particular, the age groups that people are concerned about. And so I think, there's a flexibility needed there in terms of no community is static in terms of obviously their development and their history and their needs. But I think in particular, if you think about a migration journey and process, that's particularly relevant for refugee origin communities. And then I'd say this is certainly a story about, not the development and movement of the community, but certainly with a longer term research collaboration, certainly the development of Tej and I as researchers and professionals. I started as a doctoral student. Tej was an MPH student. And what has developed over time in terms of our career trajectories and the roles that we've played, which I think is also a kind of a unique thing to say, Tej started out as an RA on a project in Boston, and now he's like the executive director of a large community organization in Pennsylvania, right? And so I think there are a lot of unique opportunities there, right? And certainly then this idea of place, we started doing this work in Boston because that's where both of us were. And then especially with issues of secondary migration, I ended up finding my way here to Lehigh, in part because I knew there was a huge amount of secondary migration happening in central Pennsylvania. And then Tej's sort of life trajectory, also looking at movement of his family members to Pennsylvania and deciding to move from the DC area up to Harrisburg. So this is sort of in my mind thinking about, and then some of our responses to maybe some of the Q&A you'll have, Tracy, just to keep in mind sort of this larger context and how Tej and I might be looking at things differently in terms of thinking about that. So I will stop sharing there.
Great, thank you so much. So it's really fascinating how, across these different presentations that you've brought before us so far, that focus on time, right? Not just the history of the different populations that you work with, but also the history of your own work and your own collaboration and your own relationship. So I feel like you both groups have already kind of talked about the origins and kind of laid out this concept and context of time and the importance of time. But maybe we could go a little deeper into relationship building, both within the collaboratory CBPR as well as with broader communities, and some of the kind of challenges maybe you're faced doing that with all these changes, trying to keep that relationship going.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say certainly from my perspective, and also if we think about how I would respond to sort of what some of the biggest challenges have been, is about, for me personally, learning about the community and building trust. And when I started working as a project manager, I didn't know anything about the Bhutanese community, and that's actually how I met Tej, because I had an undergrad was Googling Bhutanese refugees. And there was a story about Tej being at BU and talking about being a refugee. And I said, this guy, so we need to talk to this guy. So that was a very steep learning curve for me, right? And then certainly, and I also think it's kind of interesting in thinking about building trust, especially in the different places I've worked, right? Whereas like you can build some foundational trust with key figures. It took quite a bit in the Boston area, and then we expanded to start working with a community in Western Massachusetts. So in that sense, it's the same cultural group, but it's a different community, right? And I'd say the same thing, it's been interesting here in Pennsylvania because a lot of the people that I did do some of this formative work with in Massachusetts have also moved here. So there has been certainly a bit of an advantage in that it hasn't been starting from scratch. And there's an aspect of me having had a history and some kind of a reputation, hopefully good, in terms of collaborating with the community, right? But that's always an ongoing thing. It's not like, yeah, okay, it's like, yeah, okay, we have trust and we're good. It's like that's always constantly evolving and ongoing, right? And things like that. So I'd say that in response. Some thoughts there.
I've learned the value of showing up in spaces that may be different from my own. And so it takes time to do this showing up without an agenda, but more of an interest. And I say this because these two communities which I'm working with, continue to work with, do things on some level differently, but on other levels are the same in their outlook, what they want for their families, and et cetera, et cetera. So I've learned the value of showing up and observing and then being invited eventually. It takes a lot of time and patience. But when you show up and become a familiar person or a familiar guest, then I think that then opens the door to other things. So in the work that I do, a lot of time is spent showing up to community events and asking questions and interacting. Never underestimate the skill set. So I bring other skill sets to the table. If I want to have conversation with grandmas or mothers, then I bring my cooking skills to the table. If I want to have conversation with youth, I bring some popular something to the table and start a conversation, knowing good and well I don't have all the answers and I might be uncomfortable because there are pieces of this history or this journey that I don't understand. But these are key pieces to relationship building. Learning along the line. So and also not just being there in time of celebration, but in times of trial. One of the most profound things that I think was a testament to me just showing up was the community lost a youth, a valued young member of this community to suicide, to one of these communities to suicide. And then we're having a private session to talk about this. And I received not just one, not just two, but several invitations. And when I looked around the room, it was a closed time of mourning and grief, etc. And so when I looked around the room, there were very few outsiders, and I was invited. And so to me, I didn't take that lightly because communities are very careful about their outside, how they appear to the outside. And so I feel that in sustaining times like these, those are moments you can draw upon. And so those are to me, some of the things that the learning points or lessons learned for me showing up, even when it's an uncomfortable space.
A few things I wanted to add, especially to your question about the challenges, Tracy. And I wanted to start from what Dr. Sharon in your introductory note, you mentioned about the knowledge gap. And, from my stand as the community partner, from that perspective, and because of my involvement with the research team, yet studying about the community, I think I saw a knowledge gap of the research or the work that we're doing. That is a very significant challenge to minimize, because we are all researchers. We practice public health. We write, we talk about these issues, but on daily basis. it's not the same for community in general. And to bring them up to speed, or at least to the level that we can in understanding about the scope of research, what research is, what public health is, and as we get deeper into specific subjects, what mental health research looks like, what community-based participatory research looks like. Now, we may not have to, explain all of these things to the community, but the basic idea of what we are trying to do and to get that across, it becomes a challenge because there is a difference in the interest, the enthusiasm, and the knowledge that the research community brings in versus what is in the community. And so, and also, similar to that, the perceived and actual value of these kinds of research activities may not be as obvious to the community. That becomes a challenge also to get their interest and collaborate with the research team. And also, and I think this is more of something, a next step to the kinds of work that we have done, and a potential challenge also I have perceived is, us as researchers being able to connect to public health departments of relevant population or age groups and service sectors. In this short period of my public health profession, I have had the opportunity to work with Dr. Fran Felker and other researchers, also work for government sectors and also work for service sectors. And wherever I go, I would feel this, absence of the other areas that I have worked in. So I see there's a huge scope of this work, opportunity for us to extend the community work to include service sectors and potentially public sector into these discussions. Because at the end of the day, it's they who will be more involved and responsible and able to provide any services or programs or any interventions. So I think that's also a challenge, is oftentimes because of the scope of research that we do, partly at least, I think. But that's also another challenge and something I would wish for our work to continue.
Going a little deeper into what you've all said. So thinking about kind of training the next generation, right, in the community and in academia, right? And so I get a lot of questions from my students on this. And Sharon, you were talking about working with a lot of student researchers who are from the community. And so kind of how do people straddle those different worlds, right? When you're of the culture of academia and you're of the culture of the community, and you're of the culture of service organizations, right? Those are very different cultures. And it seems like there can be a lot of conflict and tension that can come up when you're trying to straddle different ones. I was wondering if you could speak on that, if all of you could speak on that a little bit.
Sure. I get to see the conflict in that regard. I'll put it this way. I'll give an anecdote, storytelling. So we have trained up the next generation of service providers, social work, in business, in health, etc., and in case management. And unfortunately, one of our case managers was from the community. And the case manager during our post-COVID, when funds were dwindling, got let go. And the community didn't understand that once that case manager was let go, the cases ended, that had to be turned over to someone else. And so it was very awkward for her to straddle and say to her elders and individuals, I can't touch this anymore because I'm no longer employed to do this. but you help us. What do you mean? And so, as her former mentor, we had this conversation about how, and this is something researchers do feel too, when you have to move on and you've built this relationship and you have to straddle your work world with the community. You've built these relationships. This was a very difficult challenge. And so as she navigated this, she removed herself a little bit, went out of state actually to put some distance, and then return. What had to happen was to fill that void was to bring in another trained young person from the community to say, this is not a total abandonment, just a transition. And so, having seen that happen, it allowed me to think very clear, a little more strategically as I trained individuals and douse them with public health speak and douse them with all the skill sets and mindsets. I have to also remind them too, you do belong to this community. So you have to help me also understand your reality and what corners you cannot walk in, or you are going to be in precarious situations because their identity and their reputation as well as belonging could be at risk. So this is something I'm seeing happening as people are tooled in the work world. There's a perception there may be some distancing from, wait a minute, you're distancing from your community. And so this is, as mentors, these are things we really have to look at. I guess I'm saying look at a whole person approach. And that has evolved over time and continues to evolve.
I can say a couple of things. I'm very curious as to what Tej will say about this. That was great, Sharon. I think sort of and what you are saying made me think a lot of sort of different areas. Maybe one thing I would sort of add to that is in a leadership role on a research study, I think it is our responsibility to also acknowledge and engage with those challenges, and not to say a reality. It is much easier for me to say to a community research assistant, well, here are our boundaries about, they tell you something challenging, they're having a hard time, but you're a researcher. And so we're not a service provider, and that's, and I think so working with a team and having some really good, honest conversations about to say they are clear boundaries is just not reality. And so to acknowledge the need for some flexibility in, I remember one in particular, and we're also working with some Somali refugee groups and had some discussions sort of saying, I get that as a member of this research team, it is not my role to follow up with this individual, but as a member of my community, if I were to not follow up, this would be really shameful. And to allow that to be okay, right? And to need to be okay, and having these conversations about then what is the best way to maneuver that, because you are in these multiple identities all at once, right? But I'm curious maybe what Tej you might have to say as in your role on stuff.
No, I think you captured it well, Rochelle. But again, I think from my role, it has been, at times challenging, but we have been able to, thinking about the teams and individuals that we have worked from the community, engaged through our research activities. As with the community, these are also the same people from the community who may not know the scientific aspect of the work that we do, or even basic things around what we're doing. And the training and time and persistence is important to be able to both and also one thing we have realized, it takes a lot of time to a lot of exercises and efforts on the team's end, from team's end, to make feel these staff members in the community that they can do it. Not something they have always had done, and because the work is new, as well as these may not be individuals that have high education qualifications, because oftentimes the kind of opportunities that the kind of positions, for example, through our work that are created are most of the time part-time or part-time and flexible, because of the work with the community require very flexible scheduled individuals, and they may not be ready to absorb some of the things that we may be doing. So it takes a lot of training and helping them communicate about the project ideas to the community, make them familiar to both the research work as well as the community.
So I think it's pretty clear that you're all deeply committed and passionate about the work that you do. But I was hoping that you could share with you some of what you find personally rewarding, or a particular best of doing this type of work to inspire others to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest things are meeting people like Tej and developing really good, lasting friendships. I remember somebody once sort of saying, like, kind of like, how would you sense, how do you think, how would you know you're sort of a success, in a metric of what you do? And I said, well, first off, I think if people still want to work with me, but also if people want to be friends with me outside of the work, right? And that's really meaningful, right? That wasn't something I necessarily expected. And having had, in addition to Tej, several other people now that I've gotten to know, when we've maintained a really good friendship over the years. So I think that is just fantastic. And in doing the work, I certainly have to learn about myself and be really thoughtful about my identity. How do I present? What do I offer? What do other people offer? It certainly is. I really enjoy learning about an entirely new community. This was, again, something I didn't know anything about. And I'm always learning something new, because there's so many, like, yeah, obviously the depth of sort of the variations within the community. It's not like, well, I've got it nailed, right? And that's great. I really like it. And ultimately, I do think, and sort of maybe goes back to one of the points I think that Sharon, you had made about, I also, of like, you talk about sort of the importance of showing up and being there, and I sort of think about that it's been rewarding to be able to be of service, and looking at my role as something that it better not just be about, like, transactional and this research study that I'm trying to do, but giving back and being of service for things that are not directly connected with research, but are really important to do. And trying to assist and provide support for a community of individuals. So.
For me, I think because our work involved working with the community that I am from, this was certainly a unique opportunity for me to work in the community, with the community, and also to learn about my own community. That obviously, of course, I didn't know everything that I know now. Hearing people's stories that they have gone through when I was 4 or 5 years old, which I had no idea about, and all the history and the cultural context that I would have never known about my own community if I had not been involved in this work. are some of the things that I find rewarding. Also to be able to, show the importance of this kind of work to the community and, inspire others. We have actually a few doctoral students in public health that were one way or the other inspired and motivated through our work back in Massachusetts, and many other individuals and community leaders from the community that are, that we have a very good relation and their interest. So seeing that, we're teaching about the work we do to at least a small portion of the population, if not everybody, and seeing people pursue careers and interest in this kind of work has certainly been of much more value to me to see that.
In my academic career, I would say this is one of the rare areas in which you get to become the student. And because academia requires you to be in the driver's seat all the time. But to me, this work is fulfilling because I get to become the student in a way that, not just one issue, but communities are so dynamic, changing, and I learned it's the history, the stories, the pieces of myself that I can say, oh, okay, that's a similar experience. And that is totally not even something I'm recognizing. And every year when I am asked to write letters of recommendation and I sit down and I look at how many are coming from individuals from these communities, it reminds me that this is, yes, it's time consuming. Yes, it's different. I do not speak all the languages. I may be able to greet. I certainly have to find a way to compensate people for their skill sets. I'm busy writing for grants all the time to make sure community members who have tremendous amount of knowledge and skills are appropriately compensating. All of when I come to the end, that's why I gave my picture at the end of that celebration, because the families, communities, individuals celebrate, and so I get to be part of that. But I think in terms of my career, this is where I become the student, willingly become the student.
So let's talk about the future, which something is, we're all dreading talking about the future these days, but where do you see the future of this work going generally for your own projects? What's out there on the horizon, challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think an overall goal, of course, would be able to continue and build on this research. I think challenges are, one of I guess another component, if you think about time and context, is the larger socio-political environment in which we are all in has changed since it was 12, 13 years ago when I started working with the community. I think there are realities about the external pressures and concerns of someone like Tej as an executive director of a community to be able to, understandably so, prioritize and focus on something like this, right? And so that's just a reality. So that is certainly, sort of, I have the overall wish and hope. I'd say in maybe some other aspects, I do hope that sort of within the community, it is work that can connect to the broader interests of the community, specifically working with older adults and issues around cultural preservation. And it has sort of, again, sort of thinking about sort of, if you have research assistance from the community and whatnot, it's been I think it's been it was sort of this a surprising but additional thing for, let's say, if I have, younger individuals that are translating and transcribing these qualitative interviews we did with older adults, and them saying to me, I really learned a lot. Like Tej said too, like I really learned a lot about my community and the experiences. And increasingly, I think from what I hear from Tej and say others in Central PA, that cultural preservation and documentation of the stories and experiences that happen to people back in Bhutan and Nepal is increasingly a concern and wanting to prioritize. So I also think in any of the research that we're doing can hopefully inform these other goals, which may not be the most immediate goal of our work. Those are some thoughts on my end.
I've seen the work take on a new shape, or actually is blossoming, because it has created, people have resolve. They've seen so much, been through so much. And so what might irk us may irk them less, and provide opportunities for them to say, well, as a community, here is our way forward. You with us or not? And what I've had the privilege of, like I said, becoming the learner, is having someone who worked with me as an undergraduate now lead the charge of a nonprofit that houses a research network that myself and my colleagues were co-founders under their CBO. And so now the research network is not in the academic institution, but under the CBO, and now is attracting attention all the way up to the state level in terms of bringing awareness to certain communities, and seeing this community CBO mentor other communities similar or not so similar to them. So now the work is really, now I have to have my ducks in a row because it is ramped up. Folks are motivated. We just finished working with a arts and prescription project where older adults have been trying to do artwork, but they're now preserving their weaving, their art forms, their music. And so things that may not have been in our lens now becomes part of that. And so I think it's broadened our repertoire in academia. I think we're trained to, what is your focus? What are you focusing on, without understanding that whatever the focus is does not reside in a vacuum. And so to me, it has opened up a lot of opportunity and creativity to pursue. So I feel encouraged that the work will continue because it's taking shape. The community has taken what we've offered, and we are working what they offer, and we are moving now in a way that I think is strengthening. Cultural preservation is big among our young cultural insiders now. It wasn't on their agenda before that. And then I see capacity building. So they have data, they have tools to make arguments. I see a big push towards more civic engagement, feeling more empowered to have voice, with caution, of course. But I see these are pieces of things that are happening. And so I need to get on board is pretty much what I'm saying in the way I'm perceiving the work.
For me, as as an individual from the community, and also, through my lens as the executive director of the community organization, as I mentioned before, one of my wishes for these kinds of work and the work that we have done is to be able to take it further, forward, and be able to implement what we know, and collaborate with service providing agencies, what we are learning through this work. That's something I would, something of a vision for me for this work, I would say. Yeah, and then as Dr. Sharon, you shared through one of your slides, different opportunities and engagements that you had highlighted on that slide. Of course, I would like to be able to be able to think about and explore some of those kinds of opportunities that we may be able to provide the community to essentially improve our relation and increase engagement that will enrich our work eventually.
So I have one more question from my list of questions. But before I ask that, I do want to ask the audience if anyone has any questions you want to ask the panel, please type it into the Q&A box now and we will get to it after this last question. So my question for you guys is, what advice would you give a young investigator who wants to start working collaboratively with a refugee origin community?
I think be prepared to invest the time, right? I think you can be really excited, enthusiastic, and have an idea. Going back to, I think, Sharon, what you had said, like one of the things, if I'm speaking with students and I say, you're going to be at a lot of meetings and events, and you're going to say, what does this have to do with our research? And it has nothing yet everything like to do with what we're doing. You better show up, right? You better show up. And not just when it's convenient for you and you need data or something. And so that is, and that just takes a lot of time and a lot of investment, right? And within that, then also humility, I think, which I think is fair, right? If I'm like, well, I have a lot of academic training and background, I'd like to think I bring something to the equation here, and I do, right? But then you also have to defer and all the things I don't know, right? And if I really do want to have a partnership, what does that look like? And I think that it can sometimes be very challenging, right? To be like, yeah, to be like acknowledging whatever the training and experiences you have as a researcher or whatever you ultimately want to label yourself. But the humility in doing that. And I also, I guess maybe my last thought is also be thinking about like, and how to humility and investing time and building that trust. You can't walk in a room and be like, you can trust me, right? And that may be obvious, right? But again, the timeline to do that, or to say, no, really, we're going to have an equitable partnership here, right? That I say to people, it sounds really great. It does. And it is an absolutely wonderful goal to have. And I think we should be striving for it. But that's an ongoing process. It's not like we've reached an equitable partnership and now it's smooth sailing, right? It's always about negotiating and things like and all of that. And so yeah, to be thoughtful of like all of these other things that go into doing that kind of work, that would be critical. Those are some of my thoughts.
Just thinking of the pressures of academia can be daunting. And so I would caution someone going in, one is the time, but the relationship building. But I also would say spend time actually letting folks know why you're here. They appreciate knowing the transparency. And I say this because when I've worked with community members and I have sent students in and with students and say, let them know This is part of your learning and why you're here. What I've found is community members, particularly parents, are, oh, this is how you do it or what you're doing. What can you help my child along the way to see this is a valuable way of approaching their life here in this new environment? And so what I would say is that there are detours you might have to that appear to be detours, but they're not. They're actually the pathways that are needed to get to mutual agendas. And so for a person starting out, for them to understand that, I don't know, sometimes we think it's a linear pathway and it isn't for us, but for the community, they're quite accustomed to the meandering of life. And so I would say someone starting out is, be transparent. This is who I am. I'm a young scholar. I have an interest. I looked you up. I also know that you are here because of such and such and so on. And that conversation. And then you take it from there and find mutual ground. I think people want to know you're genuinely interested in them, genuinely. At the same time, they also value that you are a professional that is spending time to talk with them. And so that genuineness, I think people appreciate.
Few lines. I don't know if I should be, quote unquote, advising investigators yet, but based on my experience, again, especially through the lens of a community partner, as both Dr. Sharon and Rochelle mentioned, invest time, invest knowledge, build relationship. But also, as Rochelle highlighted earlier, especially these immigrant and prior refugee communities, the trajectory of life changes. Your first few years in the U.S. as a new immigrant are very different. Your problems, what you deal with, your daily life, everything is different, and that shift that continuously changes. So do community dynamics and leaderships that will be very important for your work. So being able to and being mindful of the potential and ongoing changes in the community is also equally important. Yeah, my 2 cents.
Actually, that's a big
Big
10. That's $10 worth. But that is an important point, as I have, and if you stay long enough with a community, you will see these shifts too. So thank you for raising that, putting that out. That is true. That is so true.
Tracy, can we let the audience speak? I see Bhuvan Gautam, who is, I just saw him on the call. I would like him to share his thoughts on some of the questions. He has been one of our key community partners, advisors, collaborators from the time we did this work in Massachusetts. But I wasn't sure if we can have an audience.
If they can unmute. Yeah, Nate, can they unmute? Can or be unmuted? Hello?
Hi.
Oh my gosh. I'm so thankful for you doing this kind of discussion. My name is Bhuvan, and I was the former chairman of the Bhutanese community in Harrisburg, and I am doing my grad school in public health at Penn State College of Medicine. Very long time collaborator with Rochelle and Tej. So I'm not directly involved with the research piece, but I always admire the work they do. I did not listen the whole presentation. I'm sorry, I just missed that. I'm here. I listened, I think like 5 minutes of the question and answer.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
just saw you, so I wasn't sure
what
if
to
you're on the
talk, but
call.
if there is any specific question, I have a lived refugee experiences of like 15 years in refugee camp in Nepal. Did my undergrad and grad here, developed the community, and I'm also currently running a my own home health agency and hospice agency here. So I'm always with the patients population that includes Nepali speaking as well as in general. But if there are any questions, I might be able to answer, but I don't have anything to say.
Thank you for sharing that, Bhuvan. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We don't have any questions in the Q&A, just a little bit of kudos for an excellent panel. So I would say the same thing. Thank you. I want to thank the panelists. I think this has been a really fascinating and interesting collaborative dialogue, which is exactly what I wanted it to be. So that is great. I also want to thank everybody who attended. And I wanted to say that this is our last event for this academic year. So I want everyone to know that the series is going to relaunch in the fall. And our topic next year is going to be business and health, which is going to coincide with the College of Health's launch of our new undergraduate intercollegiate major on business and health. So those of you who have a drive for business and health, come back next year. Those of you who want to rehear, or maybe if you only got the last 5 minutes, we are going to have a recording of this session. And so that'll be available to you as well. But thanks, everybody.